Beeswax as a suitable material for dye making. Beeswax was considered to be an appropriate material for creating stamp dyes, and so we decided to test this hypothesis. We began by taking beeswax pellets and placing them into tinfoil boats that were then placed into water. The wax melted rapidly and was removed from the heat, and we allowed the wax to cool down and then attempted to form it into cylinder shapes ready to make the dyes. This was unsuccessful. The cooled wax was crumbly, and forming anything resembling a cylinder was difficult. Once the cylinders were formed, they fell apart and crumbled away in our hands. Again, we heated the wax and melted another batch in an attempt to form the cylinders before the wax had an opportunity to cool, to see if this made a difference. This too failed and produced equally crumbly cylinders. We therefore decided to heat the wax and pour it into moulds. These moulds were made from clay, and the holes were created. We attempted two different ways of doing this, one with a circular flat face stick, and two just using our fingers. Once the wax was poured into the moulds, they were left to cool before removing the clay. Once the wax had cooled, we peeled away the clay from the outside. This was much more successful than the previous efforts, and the mould created a nice, using a flat stick, produced a nice cylinder appropriate for engraving. The moulds produced using fingers were not as successful, as they didn't have the clear circular shape or a flat face for carving into. Using knives and needles, we were able to engrave into the beeswax. This was a reasonably easy process, but occasionally the beeswax would deform and small pieces of beeswax would jaggedly be raised out of the edges of the impressions. We also tried using a heated needle over a fire to create impressions, but this was found to be ineffective, as the needle would cool too quickly. As we used the beeswax stamps, we did notice a few issues. Certain elements of our design were lost as pieces in the beeswax broke away in the clay and altered the form of the future impressions. We also noted that the beeswax created a suction action and tugged at the clay as the stamp was removed. Some of the impressions left by the beeswax stamp were misshapen because of these factors. Concluded that beeswax therefore wasn't a terribly suitable material, as it would have misshapen the pot and left damaged stamp impressions.